Hey, what's up everyone? Today we're going to be working on our very first Photoshop demo. This demo is what I call the photo restoration demo, where we will be taking an old damaged photograph and we're going to be repairing it in Photoshop using some key tools, and then also, if we have time, we're gonna begin colorizing it. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Go menu under the Finder. If you don't see this menu, just click on the desktop image and it will switch your menu to the Finder menu. So go to Go, and then we're going to connect to the server. You're going to type in our path here. Again, if you don't have this here, you can always type it in now and then click the plus button, so it's always here available, ready to go. That way you don't have to type it in every single time you log onto the server. And then you just hit connect and we get our server here. We're going to go to the art folder and navigate to our class folder, which is Kirk IDM Fall 20. I've marked them red so that you can kind of locate them in here quickly. All right, so now we're going to go to the demo files folder and navigate to the photo restoration demo. And in here we have the old photo2.jpg. This photo is the photo we'll be using to restore. We'll be repairing this image today. So what you need to do is click this photo and drag it right to your desktop. Make sure you do this step, because if you just open it now, it's going to save over this image, and whenever somebody goes to grab the image, they're going to grab your saved work, and we don't want that to happen. So be sure to click and drag it to the desktop and then just close out of the server. All right, so first things first, the way to open up a file in Photoshop, there are a couple of different ways. We can simply just click the app in the dock and it opens up, and we can go to File, Open, and navigate to the desktop. And my file is where? In the P's. Photo, old photo, and the O's. So there's my file. I can navigate to that file and choose Open. Okay, and now we have that image inside of Photoshop. Another way to do it is to simply click the image and drag it right on top of the app, and it opens it up that way. Now you want to be sure you're not just double clicking it, because if you just double click it to open it, it opens it up in what a program called Preview, and this is Apple's image previewing program by default. So sometimes people get a little confused, like, well, I opened up the file, but I don't see all the settings you have. Like, I don't see the toolbar and all that. And that is because it's been opened up in a separate program, one that is not Photoshop. So don't double click it. That's not going to get you where you want to go. You either click and drag it onto the app, or you go to File, Open. Okay. All right. So now we have lots of cracks in this image. We have a picture of a lovely, what appears to be a lovely young couple, military man, looks like, and we want to repair this photograph, and we have a few different ways of getting rid of these cracks. Some are much worse than others. And then we're also missing a piece, so we're going to have to replace that, and then we're going to spend some time on a very basic colorizing technique, to where we can add color to their clothes. We can add some skin tones and eye color, hair color, and all that. All right, so there are a few different kinds of tools. There's certainly a large variety of tools that attach to your cursor. And I like to break these down into a few different categories. So with these three tools here, and if you hover over them, you'll see that they'll reveal the name and what they do. when you hover over. It even gives you a little video preview there. This is called the rectangular marquee tool. This is the magic wand tool. This is the polygonal lasso tool. These are all selection tools. That's what category they fall under. They are meant for selecting pieces of the image so that you can begin manipulating those sections, those selections that you make. And they all select in various ways. And the other kind of tool is what I call a brush-based tool, which certainly is the paintbrush. And as you can see, when I click on it, it gives me this little circle. And whatever color is in this swatch is the color that will be painted on top of the image. Okay, so I've actually painted on top of this image. It's on the same layer. So I've essentially just graffitied this photograph. And because I don't want to keep that, I can always go up to Edit, Undo Brush, and it will undo the last thing I just did. You can keep going back, but since that's the only thing I did, that's as far back as I can go. You can also choose Redo Brush. So you have those undo and redo options like you do in most programs. And it's a brush-based tool, meaning that it's an effect you paint onto the page. There are other brush tools like the blur tool. And as you can see, I have a small circle there, and I can change the size of my brush to be bigger. So here's the size settings. I just clicked on this little drop-down menu, and I can just bump up the size, and you can see how big it's getting right now. It's 121 pixels, and that's what that looks like. That size looks like on the screen. And when I paint with this, I'm actually, see, I'm clicking over and over and kind of moving my mouse back and forth. You can see that her eyes are blurring out. I'm not painting a color necessarily. I'm painting an effect, and it's affected wherever I put my mouse. So I'm going to hit undo 1,000 times to get back to normal here. And the shortcut key for undo is Command Z on a Mac. I believe it's either Alt Z or Control Z. Maybe some of you PC users can clarify that, but I'm pretty sure it's either Alt Z or Control Z on a PC. And it's a good shortcut to remember because it's one you'll be using often. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between a brush tool, a brush-based tool, and a selection tool. And I guess I didn't quite go into selection that much. With the marquee tool, you basically can create rectangular selections. I'm just going to move my feather. Rectangular selections. So now if I were to hit delete, whoops. Sorry, I'm having stuff happen on the other side of my screen. So with the marquee tool, I can select things with a rectangular shape. And you'll notice these kind of blinking lines. Photoshop calls these marching ants. And anything inside of these marching ants is what is selected. So if I were to hit delete, I would delete, basically cut a hole to the shape that I selected. Now, what you're seeing here is a white and gray checker pattern. And what that represents is transparency. So it didn't just make what I deleted white, it made it transparent. So if you think of there just being, empty space behind this photograph, it's actually an empty hole, and a hole we cut into. So I'll demonstrate what that means exactly. So I have two layers now over here. And what I can do is with the top layer, I can move it around and you can see the other one through the hole I created. So it's like I literally cut a hole in this thing. And I did that simply by deleting or hitting delete on the keyboard my selection. So again, I'm going to hit undo. So those are selection tools. The magic wand, wherever you click, will select a certain percentage of color depending on where on the image you're selecting. And this works really great for selecting like blocks of color. If you have like a whitewash sky that you want to maybe add some clouds to, you can select the sky. That's kind of how the magic wand tool works. And then the lasso tool is more of a freehand selection, to where I'm drawing a line with it and connecting the dots, and it gives me a more custom shape. And as stated in the previous video, you can click and hold on a lot of these tools. Any tool with this little white arrow in the bottom right corner, you can click and hold and see what else is in that drawer, like the quick selection tool. Quick selection tool is actually a brush-based selection tool, so it's a bit of a hybrid, and you can just click and paint your selection on and delete it if you want to. Okay, so that's kind of how selection tools work. What we're going to be using primarily today is brush-based tools, and we're going to use those to first to repair the cracks. We're going to start with the clone stamp tool. And if ever you want to know the shortcut of a tool, you can always hover over it and find it in parentheses next to the name of the tool. So if I were to choose S on the keyboard, it would bump it to that tool. It would apply it to my cursor. So now I have the clone stamp tool in hand. The other way is just to simply click it and choose it. Now the cool thing with brush-based tools is that you can determine what size, as I stated before, what size you want your brush. It can be really large or it can be really small. And you can also affect what's called the hardness, and that's how blurry an object, how blurry your brush will be. And this is probably best explained through the actual paintbrush tool. So right now I'm going to set my brush to, let's keep it at 50 pixels, but I'm going to make my hardness 100%. So take a look at this. I'm painting now, and you can see the edge of the paintbrush is pretty sharp. It's got a very defined edge to it, right? Like I could even write things with this. Okay. But if I bring my hardness all the way down, you'll see what changes. See how it has that soft edge now? So that's what hardness means, and that is a setting that is available to all brush-based tools. Every brush-based tool has your size settings and your hardness settings. Okay, so I'm gonna hit undo, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z on a Mac. So back to the clone stamp tool. I am going to make the hardness 0. I want a very soft, feathery edge, but I'm also going to bring my brush size down to probably like 35. And these numbers, if you really want to get precise, you can actually type in and then hit enter, and it will apply it. So here's what the clone stamp tool does. If you just try to click and paint now, you're going to get this dialog box that comes up, and it says, could not use this clone stamp tool because the area to clone has not yet been defined. Option click to define a source point. So we're going to hit OK. What that means is I'm going to hold down Option on my keyboard, and you see how my cursor, a little easier to see over the black background. When I hold down Option, my cursor changes to these crosshairs. And that means it wants me to target a place on this photograph for it to sample from. So if I want to get rid of this crack right here, I need to target another area that I want these this crack to be replaced by. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of move my cursor over just a little bit from this crack. I'm going to hold down Option and I'm just going to click once. And what that's done is it's sampled the pixels I have clicked on, and it will take those pixels and it will then begin to put them, I'm clicking and dragging and tracing this crack, replace them with pixels from that location I clicked on. So now it looks like that that crack has disappeared. And so if you noticed here, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to click right here, target that area, and then I'm going to come up here and paint this. Okay, you'll notice there is that cross that's following my mouse, and what that means is that it's picking up pixels from that crossed area and putting them where my brush is. It's covering up the crack that was there. So it's kind of like painting with other parts of your image. There is a simpler way, believe it or not, of doing this, and it's using what we call the spot healing brush tool and the healing brush tool. Now these are simplified versions of the clone stamp tool, which make things like these cracks a little bit easier to paint with. The spot healing brush tool, you can just simply paint right on. You don't even have to option click. And what it does is it samples and I'll zoom in here. If we're going to tackle this crack right here, it samples the pixels that are irregular. Instead of pulling them from a separate part of the photograph, you're actually sampling it takes the most common colored pixels and replaces the uncommon ones with them. So let me make my brush a little bigger here. So if I'm going to paint along this line, this crack here, what it's done, see it's almost completely gone. I'm going to hit undo again. So what it's done is it's taking the pixels on either side of the crack, these beige looking pixels, and taking those colors and putting them into the irregular ones, which are the sometimes white, sometimes like a darker brown. Those are the pixels that aren't showing up as frequent, and it's just replacing them with those. So it's just filling them in. So that's where it's sampling the pixels from. Now, with this tool, you can pretty much go to town on all these kind of minor cracks, and I would say go for it. Do as many of those minor ones as you can. You can start doing the big ones like that. It's kind of it's almost therapeutic. So yeah, do your best with the spot healing brush tool to clean up these cracks that are found on the background, but don't go after the ones on the clothes or the face just yet, because there are some tips I have for making those a little better. While you're doing that, there's also just the straight up healing brush tool, and that can be found under the same drawer, healing brush tool. And the difference between this one is that it is location based, just like the clone stamp tool, to where, like, if I try to paint with it, oh, well, that's new. That's a new Photoshop feature, to where you can paint with the healing brush tool without needing to select an area. But it does still function like the cloning stamp tool, but it doesn't completely replace the pixels. It actually kind of meshes them together with the existing ones. So I'll show you. So if I option click on this man's eye, that's where I'm going to be targeting pixels from. So now if I come over here and I start painting this man's eye in, what it's going to do is it's going to take those pixels, but it's also going to kind of blend it into the background. Okay. If I were to do that with the clone stamp tool, the difference is that it's going to take these pixels and put them where I'm painting without blending them into the existing pixels that I'm painting on top of. So you see how his face comes through brighter? It's because it's behaving as though I'm painting right on top. Whereas with the healing brush tool, it's like I'm painting and it's just kind of seeping into the pixels behind it. So they're kind of blending together. It's like the difference between using really opaque paint like acrylic and painting on top of something versus like watercolor. It's really thin and it kind of blends into the color that you paint on top of. So that's a difference, the biggest difference between the healing brush tool and the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to hit undo, undo. But for now, as I said, the spot healing brush tool, go ahead and just take some time and start cleaning up the smaller cracks. And a quick key for making your brush bigger or smaller. As I said, you can come up here and just make it bigger or smaller. However, based on the size of your cracks, you'll want to make your brush bigger or smaller. And the quick key is with the curly brackets, the left and right bracket on the keyboard. If I hit my right bracket over and over again, it makes the brush bigger 1 pixel at a time. Or it looks like maybe 5 pixels at a time. So if I hit my left bracket, it makes it smaller. So that's just a quick way of changing the size, especially if you're kind of just making small adjustments as you go. You know, with this crack tends to be a little bigger, so I'm going to make it that much more. The idea here is to repair the image without it looking like it's been repaired. So if you end up with like some streaks left behind by your brush, try to make those less obvious. And that'll come with just practice and learning how your tool behaves with the image you've got. All right. Well, I'm going to go to town here and speed up the video. That way we can move on a little faster. Okay, so I've gotten rid of most of the cracks in the background. There are still kind of these little divots here and there, but I'm not going to get too picky for this demonstration, but certainly do your very best and get rid of all the blemishes. Now we are going to move on to this missing piece of the photograph, and the way to handle this is to grab another tool known as the patch tool, and it can found under the healing brush tool drawer. It's called the patch tool, and this is a repair tool that is selection based. So I can freehand a selection and repair the image that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by drawing a selection around this corner, okay? And I've just kind of gone out of the lines here and it just automatically snaps to the edge there. But I've also I've selected around these edges too, these kind of torn bits there. So I'm not tied up against the missing piece. I'm kind of giving myself a little wiggle room on the edge here. And all you have to do is just click inside the selection, click and drag. And I'm going to drag down because that's where I want to sample my image from. And if you hold down Shift, it's going to actually kind of keep it locked into an up and down position. You notice I'm moving my mouse side to side, and it's not bumping out of the up and down motion. And what that does is whatever I'm dragging my selection over, it's sampling those pixels and putting it inside my original selection. So once I let go of my mouse, it then repairs it. And I can click outside and deselect, and you wouldn't even know there was a missing piece there. Now I can go back to my spot healing brush tool and kind of just touch up those little areas that kind of stand out. And there you have it. All right, so now let's tackle the faces, which sounds kind of funny. But let's I'm going to zoom in a bit here. And the thing about faces is there's a lot of varying shades of color, or I should say gray in this case. And so that can make the spot healing brush tool and the healing brush tool a little more complicated. It tends, when you start healing through different contrasts of color, you start to see a little more streaking in your brush, and you don't want that, especially on the face, because it then becomes much more noticeable as it starts to look like a ripple in their face, and you just want to try to avoid that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my spot healing brush tool, and I'm going to make it much smaller, and I'm going to make short strokes, and I'm going to start, say, with this crack here, and my first stroke is going to be just in the hair. Okay, and now instead of going all the way through, which kind of works, but you start to see a little streaking right here, and I'm not sure if you can see that clearly on your computer, but you might notice if you try it yourself. The way to avoid this is, as I said, just tackling like sections at a time. So I'm just doing the hair here, then I'm just doing the bright part of the forehead here, and then I'm just doing the darker part of the forehead there. And that kind of, that takes care of most of the streaking there. I can always come back, and kind of do one-click touches on those problem areas, right? Now I'm going to try, I'll try up here. So just through the hair first, then one or two clicks in these darker areas, short stroke through the midtones there, and again. So give that a shot. Take it by sections according to the value you're brushing on top of. So if it's a dark area, just paint in the dark areas. If it's a kind of mid-tone area, just take it in that short little strides there. All right, here I go. Okay, so what I've done is repaired the woman's face, and there's still a few things happening here that I could probably spend a little more time on, but I'd like to move on to colorizing. So for the sake of this demo, I'm going to move on, but what I'd like to see you guys do is to repair the whole image. Get rid of as many cracks as you can. So that means the man's face, and then over the clothes as well, using those few tools that I've shown. But on to colorization. So this is certainly not the only way to colorize an image, but I think it's a good way for you to understand how layers work and how they can interact with each other. And it certainly adds a little more life and a little more dimension to this portrait. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the layers palette, and the first kind of thing I like to let people know is that organization is really important when it comes to layers, especially if you have a lot of them. So by organizing them, I mean first and foremost labeling them. So I'm going to call this portrait and hit enter. And then I'm going to create 3 new layers. And the way to do that is to simply click this little plus button at the bottom of the layers panel. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. And for each one, I'm going to name one highlight. I'm going to name one mid-tone. I'm going to name the last one shadows. And then I'm going to click on this little folder icon, and what that does is it creates what they call a group. And I'm going to name this group Woman's Face. And I'm going to select these 3 layers that I just made, and I can select them all by holding down Shift. And I'm going to click and drag them into that folder so that all the layers of color that I'm going to add to this woman's face will be organized into this one folder. And what you'll do is you'll create one for the man's face, you'll create one for the man's shirt, you'll create one for the woman's blouse or dress, and then also one for the background. Okay, so starting with the highlights, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this color swatch here, this square. It's the one on the top left. If I double click it, it should open up this palette. Mine was already open, but if yours wasn't, sorry, this palette was on my other screen. And it opens it up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find, you can move your colors around by clicking and sliding up this rainbow slider where we have access to all colors. And I'm going to kind of go in the orange area, but then you can get even more precise by moving this color picker around, and I'm going to move it up kind of toward this whitish kind of peachish color, and this is going to be the lightest color of the woman's skin. So and then I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to choose the brush. I'm going to make sure that my highlight layer is selected. Okay. The way to select it is to simply click on it, and you'll know it's selected because it's highlighted in light gray. So I'm going to select highlight layer, and I'm going to make sure my brush is at its softest, so 0% hardness, and I could probably bump this up a little bit. There we go. So something like that. So now I'm just going to paint right over wherever you can see the skin of her face. And it's going to be weird because we're like painting right on top, and it's going to feel like we're just covering up, and we are. But that's okay. All right. Gotten it all there. It's okay if you go out of the lines a little bit. We can fix that up later. We'll clean it up. All right, we've done that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over back to the layers palette, and I'm going to click this eye icon. And what that does is it hides it. The eye stands for visibility. So if the eye is there, it means you can see the layer. But when you hit the eye, it means it makes it invisible. The layer is still there. You just can't see it. Okay, so now we're going to go to our color picker again. Clicking that top left color swatch brings up the color picker. And now I'm going to go for a slightly more like a mid-tone color here. And I might add a little more red to this just because we want the woman to look like she is alive, has some color to her face. So something like that. Again, these colors are up to you. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to click on the midtones layer, and I'm going to make my brush a little smaller. Again, I'm hitting the the left bracket key on the keyboard. And I'm going to paint in just the areas where you would find kind of midtones. And you can kind of follow the shading here. So I'm going to kind of brush over her cheeks, maybe over and under her mouth, cheeks over here, a tinge in kind of the sides of her eyes. Let's see, maybe across her forehead some, and then a few defining lines through her neck. Okay, that seems pretty good for now. I'm going to turn that off. Then I'm going to click on shadows layer. I'm going to choose a new color, which is now much darker, probably something like this, and maybe a little more brown. I'm not sure. We'll see. All right, and here we want to target the darkest areas, and since the darker areas tend to be smaller, I'm making my brush smaller by hitting those bracket keys on the keyboard. So again, we're just lightly brushing over. I'm not being too careful about staying exactly on her face. It's okay if I spill out into the hair or the background. No problem with that. And if you think about it, I don't know how many of you are familiar with makeup. I certainly am not, but I do get a general concept of contouring. It's kind of like what we're doing. Because once we turn all these back on, we want to blend these together. So I've turned these layers back on simply by clicking the the visibility icon. And what I want to do is, firstly, I want to be able to see the portrait on top of this. And the way we do that is to simply click the portrait, drag it to the top. And you want to be sure you drag it to the very top. You'll notice that if I just drag it over the woman's face folder, it'll want to put it in the folder, and that whole rectangle is selected blue. But you want to go even further up to where you just have that single blue line, and that'll put it on top but not inside the folder. And now from here, in order to see the layers underneath, I need to add what's called a blending mode. And the blending modes for each layer can be found under this normal drop-down menu. And what a blending mode does is it blends it into the layers that it is on top of. And if you just kind of go through these, you can see what each one does. And we're just going to deal with multiply. Multiply allows all color to come through the lightest areas of your photograph. Okay? So now we see the color through the photograph. It's a little bit darker, and that's okay. But it also looks like her face has been painted, and we don't want that. We want it to look like skin tones. So we can actually blur these out and adjust the vibrance of these colors with some different settings. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to turn off shadows, and I want to blend in the midtones. So I'm going to select the midtones, and then I'm going to go up to filter, and I'm going to choose blur, Gaussian blur. And what this is going to do is it's going to add a blur to the midtones layer. And currently mine is set at 1 pixel radius, which isn't much. So I can actually bump that up. And you can see as I go up, the blurrier that becomes. Okay. And so I want to go just blurry enough to where it like gets rid of those harsh lines, but not so blurry that we don't see it anymore. So I'm gonna put mine at like around 25. And again, you can type these in, but 24.7 seems to be okay. We still see that flush of color in her cheeks and her forehead, and that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to hit OK. Now I'm going to turn the shadows back on, select the layer, and do the same thing. I'm going to go back up to blur, Gaussian blur, and as you can see, it holds the same settings as last time. But I'm just going to bring it down to see if that's in fact the kind of coloring I want. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close. So I'm keeping mine to about the same. Again, yours is going to be a little bit different. So just do what you think looks good. This is where you kind of get to be the artist and decide what you're going for here. So I'm going to hit OK. But it still does feel a little dark. And if yours is like too dark, you can, again, keeping that layer selected, come up here in the opacity section and click on that arrow and bring the opacity down. And all that's doing, and you don't have to follow this part, I'm going to turn everything off except for the shadows. You can see the shadows here. Actually, let's do it with this. So all opacity does is it tells you're telling the computer how opaque or how transparent you want your image to be. So I can actually click and make this image see-through ever so slightly, okay, by decreasing the opacity, by making it more transparent. I certainly don't want to do that with this photograph. I actually want to do it with the shadows. So that's kind of what's happening. It's like it's fading away. It's letting more color that's behind it come through. So that's with it completely off. And that's about halfway. So I'm going to stick with that. Now, this is really going to start popping once you add color to the hair and to the clothes. But one thing that I want to show you is how to do the eyes, because right now we just have these flesh tones over the eyes and it still feels kind of flat, still feels kind of black and white. So the way we can do that is we're going to zoom in using my zoom tool right there. I'm going to grab the eraser tool right here, which, fun fact, is a brush tool, brush based. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase out the eyes. I'm going to make this brush much smaller, so now that the brush fits inside the eye. I'm going to select my shadows layer and erase out the eye. And you're not going to see much change because we actually have to erase through 3 separate layers: the shadow, the midtone, and the highlight. And right now, because my shadow is selected, I'm only erasing through the shadow. There wasn't much shadow in this area, but I'm going to do it in both. See it getting a little lighter. Even if you don't see much change at all, just do it anyway. Then I'm going to move on to my midtone. Start erasing that out. Erasing out the midtone of this eye as well. Erasing out the highlight of this eye. So now we see that white coming through much more clearly. And now I can add a new layer, and I'm going to call this eyes. And I'm going to put it in the woman's face group so I know that it's the woman's eyes, not the man's. And I'm going to choose a color, and I'll choose like a blue. Why not? Something like that. And with my paintbrush, making my brush a little smaller, I'm going to paint in some blue there. And this is just terrible. It does not look realistic at all. But here's where you can bring down the opacity so it's not so in your face. When I zoom out, you can see it's starting to come together, looking a little more realistic. Sometimes it helps just to come through with an added flesh tone layer. I'm going to call this pink. Choose like a more pinkish highlight. Let's see how this goes. Make my brush much bigger. And you can just kind of bring in some blood to her face, even to her lips. And again, we're going to bring down the opacity so it's not so hot. And with that added kind of pink tone, it starts to look like a color photograph, okay? So that's just a real real down and dirty of way of colorizing an image, but I think it's going to help you guys familiarize yourself with the layers palette. And what I'd like to see you do is go through this process. You know, the highlights, make a highlight, midtone, and shadows layer for the man's face, and then an eyes layer for his eyes, and then create another group. So you're going to have man's face. You're going to have a group for man's shirt, and you're going to have midtones. So depending on what color you choose for his coat here, many people like red, you know, a red coat. Sometimes I see people do blue. You're going to be having a dark blue, a mid-tone blue, and a highlight blue for the shirt. Same goes for her dress. If you choose a green, you're going to have a dark green, a mid-green, and a highlight green. All in a separate folder so that you can navigate and not be confused, particularly with the faces, because you do have eyes for the woman, but you also have eyes for the man, and you don't want to confuse those two layers, right? So you're going to have them in their separate folders, and you can close them and open them as you need to, and you're not going to be scrolling all the way through the layers palette looking for the correct eyes layer, you know. And that's why organization is really important when it comes to Photoshop and using this many layers. And oftentimes you will be working with, you know, 10 layers or more. It's not uncommon. So what I'd like to see by the end of this demo, and you're going to hand in, save it to your class folder on the server so that I can see that you did it. This complete restoration. So all of the cracks will be gone. The face will be painted in. The hair will be painted in. The shirt and the dress will be painted in. They'll all be in their own groups. And then you can add a background color too if you wish. All right, well, that's it. Thanks for hanging in there, and I will see you in the next video.